Sherrer, Seattle, Washington, advocate for the wrongly convicted.
So I had about 20% of the people that I've interviewed so far, which would be over 100, who are dealing with wrongly convicted situations.
Yeah.
So it's second only to family court in terms of what we have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
What got you involved in, what got you interested in this?
Oh, in the late 1990s, I happened to come across on the internet that an organization that was calling itself Justice Denied was being put together by, actually it was mainly women. And the primary person, her name was Clara Boggs, her daughter was in prison in Nevada. And she had been convicted of murder, the murder of her infant child, because when she had gone to when her daughter had gone to the grocery store, she left the child in the care of her husband. The child started crying. The husband didn't know how to make it stop crying. He wound up killing the child. And so they prosecuted her for first-degree murder on the theory that she should have known that he would kill their daughter if she started crying and he couldn't get her to stop. Eventually, it was in 1999, her daughter's conviction was overturned by the Nevada Supreme Court, and she was released from prison. But it was working with Clara and the other people that I got involved in it. And then in the mid-2000s, about 6-7 years ago, I actually took over running Justice Denied.
And how many, do people call you all day, every day?
Yes, we receive 20 to 40 accounts a week, either by mail or email, of people with stories of being wrongly convicted. And of the cases that I've personally reviewed, I would say that at least 75% of them make credible claims that they in fact are innocent. And one of the things that I've increasingly seen is both state and federal courts are being increasingly harsh in their sentencing. So an increasing number of people are contacting us saying, well, you're justice denied, and I've been denied justice because I was sentenced to 15 years in prison for stealing a candy bar or something, which in some states can actually happen if you have prior convictions. But we don't deal with that because we just deal with actual convictions of innocent people.
Do you know Ron Kiney?
Yeah, I've met Ron.
One of the 140 people who escaped death row?
Yeah, him and his 3 co-defendants in New Mexico.
So he's an interesting guy. He's a great interview. He's got all kinds of Easy Rider stories. So that was interesting. One of the things that's been troubling to me is felony murder.
Yeah.
How many states have that, do you know?
Well, every state that I'm aware of has it.
Oh, really? Where if you're with somebody and they commit murder, you're guilty of murder?
Yeah, it's guilt by association.
Or you know the story of the young man in Florida who at the age of 19 loaned his car to somebody? That person committed murder. The young boy was at home asleep, and he's now in prison for the rest of his life without the possibility of parole for sleeping.
Yeah, well, there's lots of felony murder conviction horror stories. I mean, one that I've personally been involved with was a man in South Carolina who loaned a shotgun to some friends. They went out, committed a robbery of a gas station, killed the attendant, and they all made deals for relatively short jail terms, while he went to trial saying, I didn't know anything about this robbery. They asked me to borrow my shotgun, I gave it to him, I didn't. And, he's sitting in prison for life. And he's actually been in prison now around 40 years.
How long?
40 years.
Do you know the story of the Yankton Four, the four Native Americans serving 33-year prison sentences for sexual abuse of their nieces?
What state's that?
South Dakota.
It doesn't ring a bell.
I'd love to introduce you to Anna Grant James. She's the one that's championed the cause for them. And we interviewed there for a couple of days. And this is a case where they wanted to get these guys because they were battling the politics in the tribe after discovering that they felt somebody was stealing money from their casino. And so they rounded up a bunch of the Indian children, Native American children, I beg your pardon, and told them they could go back to their families if they said that these men had committed sexual abuse. The kids were 3 to 7 years old. And they didn't let them testify on the witness stand, claiming that it was uncomfortable for them to have to look at their uncles. So they took them back in the judge's chamber where there was a woman who whispered in their ear what it was they needed to say.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said that they did it. And then 8 years later, they actually got to go home to their families and said it never happened. And every one of the children testified for us, saying we were told to say it, but we couldn't see our families again. It never happened. They've been in prison for 18 years, I guess. Is there any hope for them? How could they get justice at this point? It's federal court, they're Native Americans.
Well, it's hard to say without knowing the specific facts, but, you know, a lot of courts don't take recantations seriously because they'll say, well, they're feeling bad, you know, their relatives, you know, they want to let bygones be bygones. So, because I know a number of cases where they were based on the testimony of a relative, you know, a child, and then as they get older, they recant, and they're all still sitting in prison. It's just, they just don't consider it to be enough. Even though their testimony is what put them in prison to begin with.
Yeah.
So without it, there's no case.
I had one young girl watch her mother be filmed, and she looked over at her mother and said, "Do you think I could go on camera?" And her mother looked at me and said, "Sure, if you sign a release." She's under 18, and so she sat down. She just turned 15, and she said, "I'd like to tell you what I asked for Christmas." Have you heard this story? She said, I said, "Okay, what'd you ask for?" I knew there had to be a big payoff. I could tell the young lady was very smart, and from the responses she had when her mother was speaking.
Yeah.
She said, "I asked for a polygraph test." And I said, "Oh, really?" She said, "I got it." So she said, "I went, and they wired me, put these wires all over me, and she don't know if you know how it works. They asked 3 questions. And I'm not going to tell you what 2 of them were because it's just too embarrassing, but the first one was, has your father stuck his fingers? And she kind of stopped at that point. She said, "I passed." She said, "I'd like to, if it's all right with you, I'd like to say something to the judge." So she looked right straight in the camera and she said, "Judge so-and-so, I've had a polygraph test taken to prove that what I've been trying to tell the court that you've refused to listen to is true. That my father's been molesting me since I was 11. He probably did it before that, but I was too young to know it." And she said, "If you want to send somebody to jail, you send me to jail. You want to find somebody, you find me." She said, "You're finding my mother and sending her to jail because I refuse to get out of the car when I'm sent on unsupervised visits with somebody who's been sexually molesting me for 4 years." She said, "I'll never get out of the car. So you quit sending my mother to jail, you send me to jail." I thought that was pretty classic.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you about polygraph. I talked to a defense lawyer in Tacoma this week, and he seems to like polygraph tests. What's your view on them? Can people beat them? Are they sophisticated enough now that they work well? The government uses them. What do you think?
Well, they're widely used in industry and by prosecutors widely use them to try to ascertain whether a suspect is guilty or not. And I can tell you one case where I know of that. There was a young man who was he hadn't been charged yet, but he was suspected of killing another man at a park. And this was in Portland where this happened. He said, I was at a party with all my friends, and one of the people at the party was the girlfriend of the man who'd been murdered. And the girlfriend even told the prosecutors that, yeah, I was at the party with this guy, but there was one witness who swore that he saw him commit the crime. The prosecutor agreed, well, if you can pass a polygraph test, we won't pursue the charges. And I told him, when I found out about this, I said, well, if you take this test, insist that your lawyer hires the examiner. Don't use the police polygraph examiner because you're not going to pass it. I mean, even if you pass it, they're not going to tell you passed it. They're going to, at most, they'll say it was inconclusive. So I said, your lawyer's going to fight it because they don't want to pay for it, because they'll have to take it out of their budget to pay for because if you look in the phone book, you'll see there's all kinds of private polygraph examiners. And his lawyer resisted for several weeks. Finally, his lawyer agreed, okay, I'll hire a polygraph examiner and I'll do the test, because I told him, whatever you do, do not let him talk you in to having the police examiner conduct the test. He took the test with the private examiner, he passed, and the prosecutor agreed not to pursue the case. So it's not just whether they're reliable or not. It's, to a certain degree, the way they're used, because there's, I run across it all the time in people that contact me, that they took a polygraph examination with a police examiner. They told them, oh, you failed, or it was inconclusive. And then years after being in prison for years, they finally actually get the report and they find out they passed. So I don't really have an opinion as to, because I'm not an examiner, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I do know they're widely misused.
It may be more about the government than anything
else,
obviously. Let me ask you about a man that I'm going to try to interview in San Quentin. And I don't remember his name by heart, so I'm looking it up.
Scott Peterson?
No.
Well, he's contacted me. He claims he's innocent.
No, he does. I don't know about that. Let's see.
Have you checked on the California DOC rules if they allow filming?
Somebody has spoken with him, and it wasn't immediately ruled out. Daryl Lomax?
Well, off the top of the head, it doesn't ring a bell.
Just curious, what are some of the worst cases that you've heard about that are out there now with people in prison?
Well, I think the most egregious one that I'm aware of is a man named Kevin Gunn in California. And this man's a giant. He's 6'9", weighs almost 400 pounds. And he's in prison for committing daylight robberies of elderly people, all of which were witnessed by many people. These robberies were committed by somebody who is 5'10" to 6 foot tall and it weighs 180 to 200 pounds. and who is a dark complexioned black man, whereas he's a very light complexioned man. So not only is he weight-wise almost twice as big as the perpetrator, but he physically doesn't have the same skin tone and every single witness to these daylight robberies that happened right in front of them. I mean, it was on the sidewalk because they happened at ATM machines, has the same description of the robber. And when I found out about his case, I contacted Professor Loftus at the University of Washington here, who is one of the leading experts in the world on misidentification. In other words, the factors that can cause somebody to misidentify. And he prepared an expert report which was submitted as part of Mr. Gunn's federal habeas petition. I made an affidavit, detailing that, this was, because one of the things I do is I maintain a database of every wrongful conviction in American history. I mean, going all the way back to the first one in 1607. So I'm aware of, every significant case of wrongful conviction that's ever happened. This is the most egregious misidentification case to my knowledge, in American history. I made an affidavit to that effect, which was included. The judge denied his petition, and he's sitting in prison, even though, I can absolutely state he didn't commit the crime. In fact, we have the jury foreman even wrote a letter that during his trial, there were so many holes in the prosecution's case because they were trying to figure out, well, how could a guy this big have committed a crime that was committed by somebody who weighed half as much as he did? It'd be like, the guy's almost as big as Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah, Andre the Giant.
And the crimes were committed by somebody roughly my size, and the jury foreman in his letter stated that they proactively filled in all the holes in the state's case in order to convict him, which now his lawyer failed to exploit that in his appeal, because it's what's called extrinsic evidence. In other words, the jury is supposed to decide based upon the evidence that's been introduced during the trial. They're not supposed to go back in the jury room and say, well, they didn't prove this, so let's just assume it, and they didn't prove that. So he's the victim of not only being misidentified, but extremely poor lawyering.
Do you know Esteban Garcia?
Off the top of my head, it doesn't ring a bell.
He's helped get 122 wrongfully convicted people out of prison. Missouri Writers Association, is that not any bad? I'll introduce you. He's a champion for wrongfully convicted. What all does Justice Denied do?
Well, there's the magazine, and then we have the website, we have the database of wrongly convicted people, we have a database of publications, movies, documentaries, books related to wrongful convictions, and then we assist in specific cases as we can, mainly by trying to find experts.
And is the magazine, I'm sorry, I've never seen it, is it ad-based or subscription?
It's mainly donations.
Okay.
And actually for the last 18 months we've been online only. Prior, for the first 12 years, we were print and online.
Well, if there's not a lot of, if the people that I've met with who are dealing with those issues aren't aware of it, I'll look forward to sharing it with them, and I'll put it on Facebook tonight.
Okay.
What else would you like to talk about? Any other stories you want to share about people similar to Kevin Dunn?
Well, I wrote a book about a case in Nevada, a woman called Kirsten Lobato, and we actually conducted a full-scale investigation of her case, and we were able to come up with new evidence by 35 witnesses, which is all included in her state habeas petition, which is now before the Nevada Supreme Court, including new evidence by 11 different experts. She was 170 miles from Las Vegas at the time a homeless man was murdered in July of 2001. And, you know, we've got alibi witnesses, she was there. We've got experts who establish his time of death within a 2-hour period of time which even the state admits she was 170 miles from Las Vegas. It's just a matter that it's very rare, no matter what new evidence you have, the prosecutors just don't, you know, they're just loath to say, we made a mistake. You know, they'd rather keep an innocent person in prison than make an admission that they didn't adequately investigate a case to begin with, which is what typically happens in almost all wrongful conviction cases, is they misidentify a person because they didn't adequately investigate. You know, they just kind of pick somebody who they think is the likely suspect, and then they start trying to, it's kind of like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You know, they try to jam the evidence to make it fit the person that they've selected, rather than doing what people normally think detectives do, which is scour around, find what there is, and then identify the culprit that way. So, in the case of Kirsten Lobato, you know, we're in it for the long haul on that. I began investigating her case 9 years ago. And if we have to go to federal court, I mean, her case could go on for another 4 or 5 years. So, and that's not unusual. Centurion Ministries, which is based in Princeton, New Jersey, you know, they've been involved in cases that took them almost 20 years to get somebody out of prison. But they've actually been in operations for about 30 years now, so. Whereas we only started in 1998, so.
Newcomers on the block. Would you email me the language that you have that you talked about in your statement about what changes are to the laws that you need? Because I'll be delighted to add those on to what we're presenting to each state legislature.
The what's in here?
Yeah. Whatever would be appropriate for me to tack on to our list of proposed legislation.
In other words, the actual change to the law?
Change to the law.
Yeah, I can do that.
You had another issue. Abolish the 1-year time limit, and also the issue of due diligence.
Yeah.
Does that actually fall within the AEA-TPA?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that hangs people up as badly as the 1-year time limit. Because as hard as this is to believe, there's actually, the way that due diligence clause has been interpreted, if there's evidence sitting in a prosecutor's file, and maybe it takes you 10 years to find that they've got it, federal courts have actually said, well, if you tried harder, you could have found it within the 1-year time period. Well, the prosecutors all know that if they can just hide the evidence for a year, they've got you.
Like take the case of the Native Americans. They kept the kids away for 8 years and wouldn't let anybody get near them. But I guess the kids were alive, and maybe they'd say somebody could have gotten to them.
Yeah. So it's kind of a case of hide the pea.
Yeah. Is there some other system? Surely other countries have a better system than we do.
Well, for example, in Canada, I've worked with a group called AIDWICS, Association for the Defense of the Wrongly Convicted. Canada doesn't have a time limit on new evidence. So if you find evidence, there was a man recently released in Vancouver, BC. He'd been in prison for 27 years, based on new evidence that in this country, he'd still be in prison, because there they try to look at the fact, what is the evidence? They don't look at the fact, they don't try to say, well, they don't consider how long it took you to get it. It's just, what does it mean? In the United States, the procedures are considered more important than the substance. I mean, there's actually been people executed in the United States for missing a filing deadline by 30 minutes, like for a stay. Because they said, well, you missed the filing deadline, so what do you have to complain about?
Yeah.
Now, that wouldn't happen in Canada.
We have judges in this country who routinely ignore the facts, and ignore the law, and ignore the procedures, and ignore the rules. But they'll sure punish somebody if they slip up, and it's their desire.
Yeah. That's another. That brings up the issue of the prosecutors always get the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
If they file something late, that's,
They get away with it, and they of course have immunity from prosecution for all their wrongs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that. Everyone convicted of a crime in America, this is a question that started out like a statement. Is it true that everyone who is charged with a criminal offense in the United States is supposed to be indicted by a grand jury? Does that apply in every state?
No. Most states, for example, take Nevada, they simply file an information, and then it has to go before a judge. A judge will hold a hearing, preliminary hearing.
Probable cause hearing?
Yeah. I think most states they either do that exclusively, or in some cases they may go to a grand jury. It's up to the discretion of the prosecutor. But of course, at the preliminary hearings almost invariably are almost as automatic as going to a grand jury as far as getting an indictment.
Yeah, one of my issues is that the grand jury room is ensconced behind sealed doors and walls inside the district attorney's office in Georgia, and yet the statutes relative to the grand jury place no authority whatsoever in the hands of the district attorney over the grand jury. They've just seized the grand jurors, and they've done that in many states, I guess, probably all states, and they use them as their puppets. We were going to be interviewing a person in California who was on a grand jury for 3 months or something, and he maintained a diary of what took place. It's going to be interesting to talk to him, because he said it's just complete total railroad. There's no justice in there, he said. The prosecutor tells them all what to do, and most of the jurors could care less.
Yeah.
Again, there has to be some country that's got a better system than we have. I know in England they hardly, the lawyers are not used very much. When I went to get something notarized, it was like a royal ceremony. I mean, the guy had hot wax and a seal, and we're putting our hand on a book, and it was incredible. Had to make an appointment a couple weeks ahead in order to get it done. And I guess that if you lose, you have to pay the attorney's fees. Now, that won't work in America because the system's so corrupt. We'd be having everybody pay when they shouldn't. But they kind of make them do that anyway.
Well, I regularly tell people that your chances of getting a fair trial are better in communist China than they are in the United States. And not only that if you are convicted, your chances of having your conviction overturned on appeal are greater there than here. Now, if it's a political crime, that doesn't apply, because you're just it's just a show trial if it involves some political act. But for just a general crime, bank robbery, theft, you got a better shot at justice there than here.
We're back on. I'm sorry, I just loved that comment. I interviewed about 10 or 12 people from Russia in various stops along the way. And I asked them, several of them, I said, was it better in Russia, where you knew you didn't have any rights and they told you so, or in the United States where you're told there's justice and all these wonderful things, and it wasn't true? They said, oh, it's a lot better in Russia. They said, we feel like we got hoodwinked coming to America. They told us it was like this in school. We chalked it up to propaganda, government propaganda. But they told us it was like this, and they were right.
Well, actually, there was a book written almost 20 years ago now called America, I believe it's America as It Is, and it was written by a Russian dissident who'd been expelled from Russia, and he was in the 80s. This was before the fall of the communism. And that's what his whole book's about. It's like, this isn't what I thought it was. This is worse than, it's the exact same thing you were saying, is that in Russia, they knew it was all scam. And it wasn't really hidden. Here, you're told that you have all these rights and freedoms and everything, but the reality is that the heavy hand of the government is hanging over you in the same way, and in some cases more ways.
Yeah, as I was saying to Phyllis, we both went to grade school about the same time, and I remember in the 50s we had these drills where we'd get under our desk.
Well, I did that.
Russians bomb. Well, I figured you were younger.
Early 60s.
Early 60s, they were still doing it.
Yeah.
We were afraid we had to be protected from the bombs, so we'd crawl under our desks. None of us ever dreamed that our own government would be a bigger threat to us than the Russians bombing us. I just throw up my hands every day and say, I just cannot believe. You're focused on the wrongfully convicted, but the things that are done in family court, there's a lot of people wrongfully convicted there. We had a woman here in the room earlier before you came in. She spent 30 days in jail for not paying child support, even though the children were living with her, and she was paying the costs.
Well, I wrote a law review article about the role that judges play in wrongful convictions, and I researched it, it's the only significant legal article published in the history of the United States on the role that on how judges contribute and cause people to be wrongly convicted. I was hoping at the time I wrote it that it might inspire, some law professors or somebody to pursue it, kind of build upon what I have in the article. But as yet, no one has. So you don't want to get me on judges, because.
Well, if you could send me a link to that or something, I would love to share it.
Yeah. And people, and this is kind of another thing along the lines of what I was talking about, the federal habeas petitions. The way the law is set up right now, we have statistics from the Nazi era. They kept meticulous statistics on how many people were interned at Auschwitz and Belsen and all these places. And so I ran the numbers once. The odds were greater of a Jew surviving Auschwitz than they are of a state prisoner in the United States having a federal habeas petition granted. It's again, it goes along with what we were saying, that there's this illusion that that when you go into court, your rights are protected. But the reality is, it's a fixed game. For all but a few people. I mean, there are a very few federal judges who do seem to take their job seriously, but most of them are just as bad or worse than state judges because they're there for life, and so there's no consequence. You know, I mean, they could literally start rolling their eyes and foaming at the mouth, and nothing's going to happen to them because they're not accountable. I'd have to think about that for a minute.
All right, I'll go back on.
I guess a summary of what Lawless America to me would be is that people do not have the expectation of receiving justice in a courtroom satisfied. I've never encountered anybody who thought they received a fair trial. I mean, of the thousands of cases that I've looked at, and people in talking with people in restaurants and coffee shops who've gone through the system, I mean, that's how bad it is. It's like a 100% error rate. You know, you would expect somebody somewhere to say, yeah, it's like, you know, I had a great, you know, the judge was a good guy and the prosecutor was fair and I had a really terrific lawyer, but it isn't. Everybody, it's like, I got screwed, you know. Even the guilty people, you know, even guilty people say that the proceedings simply weren't fair.
You know, there's people watching this who just can't believe that could possibly be true. What would you say to those people?
Well, you have to experience it and see it and somewhat live it to really know what it's like. You know, you can't expect to know what really is going on by watching television, because most of what you see on television portrays the police, the like the prosecutors, the judges as being, you know, they're out there wanting to do the right thing and protect society and keep the bad people off the streets. And that has no relationship to reality. It's entertainment.
Yeah. We ought to have we're hoping Lawless America can become a true reality TV show. We've got enough content to be a daily show for the rest of my life, that's for sure. What's your favorite wrongfully convicted movie?
Probably there was a good one, recent one called The Wrong Man. That was, I believe, a Lifetime movie with Pinochet. What's her name? Pinochet. She's a woman.
Okay.
And it was a case called a man called Calvin Johnson, I believe, and she was a paralegal. And she spent around 20 years trying to help this guy.
I saw that movie.
And she did all the work, you know, and basically, you know, she wrote the motions and she kept the case alive, and she had a lawyer who would simply sign what she did. But that shows what you don't typically see in news reports. When, you know, you see a news story about somebody being released, they'll have a picture and like their lawyer will have their arm around them and all that. But in almost all these cases, the lawyers are almost peripheral. You've got people behind the scenes that are actually doing the work. You know, they're the ones out there interviewing witnesses. They're the ones that are doing the research. But you need the lawyer to sign the paperwork that's before the court, and so they're like the face of what happened, when in fact they're almost interchangeable. But it's the people behind the scenes that did the work that aren't interchangeable. Without them, it never would have happened. And that particular movie showed that she was the person that made this guy, that enabled him to get out of prison.
Yeah, when you mentioned the paralegals, oh, I saw that. I just didn't remember the name. I have a habit, I call them lifeline movies. Oh, it's Lifetime.
And there's a number of cases like that, where women particularly spend decades, scrounging around and come up with the evidence that ultimately results in somebody being released.
You obviously interview, where are these people? Is that in the hall? You interview a lot of people, obviously, in what you do. What question should I have asked you that I haven't?
Well, it just depends what you want to know.
Well, I guess ultimately what we want to do is educate people to how serious issues are,
Mm-hmm.
which I think we've covered. But if there's anything else you can say there, and we've got to somehow figure out how to get through to people to realize these problems are real, so that we can get enough folks that'll stand up someday and do something. It's a big dream, but somebody's got to dream it.
Well, there's certain levers, like if this slight change, for example, in this AEDPA would have a dramatic impact on thousands of people. It'd be like, it's like a key. It's like suddenly the door would be unlocked. And there's probably similar provisions in some states, because, for example, for years, Virginia had a 30-day time limit on new evidence. You had to present new evidence within 30 days of your conviction, or else you were out of luck. They've since changed that to where there is no time limit. They went from being the most restrictive state in the country to being one of the most liberal. But it was because there were a number of people who were exonerated, after a period of years, and they were able to get some legislators on board to, support changing the law. It's one of the things that DNA has done is it has exposed that it can take decades to discover new evidence. And so that's one of and it's shown that there is no basis in reality for any of these laws imposing a time limit on introducing new evidence.
Yeah, we need to change that, that's for sure. One of the recommendations we make to each state legislature, the first one, I put them in order of the easiest. The first one, require that all court proceedings be recorded,
Yeah.
and allow each party to do their own recordings. That alone would cause judges and lawyers to be a little more honest, and it would enable the people to prove when they falsify transcripts or recordings or whatever else. And there is no basis for any state legislator to say there is any reason not to do that. The theory of having somebody sitting there typing what they think they hear somebody say is awfully antiquated. Truthfully, you don't need that anymore. There's ways to take a recording, I think, and convert it. You've always got the recording, but the problem we have is the dishonesty and the corruption that takes place. I personally have experienced it.
Yeah.
I had a judge who obviously had the transcript changed to say that I was sworn in. Well, I fortunately had 6 courtroom observers there for me, and when I got the transcript back, I called them up and said, am I crazy, or didn't the judge refuse to allow me to be sworn in and refuse to allow me to submit any evidence on the record? They said, that's exactly what happened. I said, well, listen to this. So I got affidavits from all of them. Then I got to the last page of the transcript, and they just completely made up a bunch of stuff and put it in there.
But I think it's becoming more common that they are audio taping. And, you know, they're doing away with the old stenographer type person.
Well, in family court,
But it's easy.
Anybody or anything.
Not always.
Yeah, but I mean, some courts are adopting that. But even then, you can doctor the recording.
That's why you need, everybody needs the ability to do their own, keep them honest. Most, I don't know. Somebody think they have it? I was told until the end. Until they close, yeah. Okay. All right. Any last word?
Just keep trucking.
We'll do it. Thank you.